What if we were never meant to return to the moon? Beyond Apollo's triumph lies a hidden story, lost files, strange signals, and warnings buried deep. From mysterious music to ancient artifacts and chilling transcripts, the moon's far side holds secrets. Join us as we uncover 10 mysteries NASA won't explain. Let's begin. The silent signal. In May 1969, just 2 months before Apollo 11 would make its historic landing, NASA launched Apollo 10, a full dress rehearsal that brought astronauts Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan within just 8.4 nautical miles of the lunar surface. Their mission was flawless, publicly, but on the far side of the moon, the one place completely shielded from Earth's radio contact, something happened. Something strange. Something NASA couldn't explain then, and still doesn't today. While the Apollo 10 crew passed behind the moon, their communication with Houston cut out as expected. For about an hour, they were entirely on their own. And that's when they heard it. You hear that whistling sound. Whoo! Eugene Cernan, Apollo 10, Command Module Audio Log. May 1969. The audio recorded on board and later archived features the astronauts reacting to what they called space music, a high-pitched, eerie whistling sound unlike anything they had encountered. It sounds like, outer space-type music. John Young. It wasn't a one-off. The sound persisted for nearly the entire time they were behind the moon. The men joked, nervously, theorized static interference, but no conclusive source was identified. When the transcript was declassified in 2008, it sent ripples through the scientific and UFO communities. Why hadn't NASA disclosed this sooner? Why were the recordings buried for nearly 4 decades? NASA's official explanation: radio interference between the lunar module and the command module. But that theory quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Experts noted that the same kind of interference should have occurred in other missions, and yet this music was never recorded again. Not on Apollo 11, not on 12, not on any other lunar flight. So why only Apollo 10? That leads us to a chilling possibility: they weren't alone. Some theorists point to the moon's far side as the ideal hiding place, shielded from Earth's eyes and radio waves. If something or someone wanted to observe us without detection, this would be the perfect perch. Even more unsettling, former NASA engineer Maurice Chatelain once claimed that certain Apollo missions were followed, observed by unknown craft. He later recanted, but only after pressure from government sources. Coincidence? Or is there a deeper connection between the music and something watching in the dark? Another researcher, Carl Wolf, a former Air Force photographic technician, reported in a 2001 testimony that he was shown images during the Apollo era of massive structures on the moon's far side, towers, domes, even what looked like machinery. He claimed a fellow technician told him flatly, "We've discovered a base on the back side of the moon. A base. A sound. A warning." It's unbelievable. Apollo 10 transcript 0006-2420. The voices in that capsule weren't excited. They were uneasy. These were trained astronauts, men who had survived high-speed crashes, spacecraft malfunctions, and intense flight regimens. And yet here, in the deepest silence known to man, they found something that rattled them. What if that music wasn't music at all? What if it was a signal? Some fringe theorists propose an even more disturbing idea. The sound was a form of communication, perhaps directed at the Apollo 10 crew. And the timing wasn't random. Apollo 10 was the first mission to fly the full lunar landing sequence without actually touching down. A final test right before humanity planted its flag. A test that someone didn't approve of. And here's the part. NASA doesn't explain if this was mere static. Why were the astronauts warned not to talk about it after the mission? According to journalist and researcher Linda Moulton Howe, who has investigated many space anomalies, NASA quietly advised several astronauts not to elaborate on unexplained events during debriefings to keep focus on mission success and avoid public panic. Is this why the Apollo 10 music vanished into classified archives for nearly 40 years? Is it just a coincidence that no Apollo mission ever went back to that exact orbital path? Or is there a darker truth about the moon's far side, a truth we were never supposed to hear? As Apollo 10 emerged from the blackout zone and re-established contact with Houston, the sound faded. Gone. Not mentioned again on record. And yet somewhere deep in NASA's vaults, the original tapes remained untouched, unreleased, and nearly forgotten. Until someone asked the right question. What else have we missed? The crater that glows. Tucked into the moon's southern hemisphere is one of the largest and oldest impact sites in the solar system, the South Pole Aitken Basin. At roughly 1,600 miles wide and over 8 miles deep, it's a scar older than most continents on Earth. A place blasted open by ancient violence. But what lies within that basin has puzzled scientists and quietly unnerved them for decades. Because buried in the darkest reaches of that crater, something glows. The first whispers came from NASA's Clementine mission in 1994. The spacecraft meant to map the moon's surface in detail detected an area inside the basin that reflected light oddly far more than expected. Odd, but not alarming. Until 2009, when the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter LRO flew overhead and captured something more. Using onboard spectrometers, the probe recorded a highly localized anomaly, elevated levels of radiation and light in a crater that should be lightless. A glow from the deepest part of the moon, a place where sunlight hasn't touched in billions of years. NASA offered a hypothesis the area might contain thorium or uranium-rich material that gives off faint radioactive heat. But independent analysts noticed something strange. The spectral readings didn't match normal thorium signatures. They weren't consistent with any known mineral. And the glow wasn't static. It fluctuated, glowing, pulsing, alive. Later analysis published in a quietly released 2016 report by researchers from Brown University confirmed the presence of a mystery mass in the South Pole Aitken region, a mass larger than Hawaii, composed of material denser than the surrounding crust. It could be metal from the asteroid that formed the crater, said Peter B. James, lead author. Or something else entirely. Or something else entirely. That phrase raised eyebrows, because James's team noted that the mass sat buried under the surface, too symmetrical to be random, too reflective for stone. One geophysicist, speaking off record, called it structurally anomalous. In simpler terms, it looked built. That's when the older data started to resurface. Amateur astronomers had for years claimed that certain parts of the moon flicker, releasing brief flashes of light, even when no sunlight is present. NASA dismissed these as transient lunar phenomena or simple optical illusions. But when those flashes correlate directly with the South Pole Aitken glow, suddenly the illusions look less like mistakes and more like signals, what glows in absolute darkness. Even more disturbing, the 1998 Lunar Prospector mission, designed to search for ice and mineral composition, detected unexplained neutron bursts while orbiting the basin. The cause unknown. Their source right above the glowing region. The moon is dead. That's the line we're told. But a place with pulsing radiation, flashes of light, neutron bursts, and buried mass that doesn't belong, doesn't sound dead. It sounds active. And here's where things get even stranger. In 2019, China's Chang'e 4 rover became the first human-made object to land on the moon's far side, right near the edge of this very basin. Within weeks, their probe reported back something odd, a gel-like substance in a small crater, unnaturally colored, reflective, slippery. Gel on the moon. Chinese media quickly toned down the description, calling it an unusual substance, and later reports shifted focus. But original images showed a patch of glossy material, unlike any known lunar soil and suspiciously close to the coordinates of the anomaly. Once again, the crater that glows seemed to draw attention and secrecy. NASA made no public comment. So what are we seeing? A buried metal mass of unknown origin, a flickering glow in a sunless pit, neutron radiation without explanation, a reflective substance no one wants to talk about. And remember, this isn't speculation pulled from folklore. These are findings drawn directly from NASA Brown University and the Chinese National Space Administration. But if these anomalies are real, then one question lingers. Why aren't we investigating? The official narrative remains firm. The moon is inert, its mysteries geological, its secrets few. But if there's something buried under the South Pole Aitken Basin, something glowing, perhaps the reason we haven't gone deeper is because we already know what's there. And someone doesn't want it disturbed. The Black Tower. In 1966, the Soviet Union's Luna 13 probe touched down on the moon, quietly completing one of the first successful soft landings on the lunar surface. Unlike the fanfare of the American Apollo missions, Luna 13's data was released with little drama. A few photographs, some soil composition reports, and minimal commentary. But buried in that modest archive, specifically in a series of black and white panoramic images, was something most people never noticed. In one photo, just on the edge of the horizon, a shadow. Narrow, upright, and towering. It looked like a structure, nicknamed the Black Tower. By independent analysts, decades later, the object appears to rise vertically from the lunar surface in a region near Mare Crisium. Its dimensions based on image scale suggest something between 50 and 100 feet tall, too symmetrical for a rock, too isolated for a natural outcrop, and most disturbing of all, it doesn't appear in any subsequent photos of the same area. That's right, when NASA's lunar orbiter mapped the site, and later when the Apollo missions photographed similar coordinates from orbit, the tower was gone. Completely. No trace, no shadow. As if it had never been there. Officially, the explanation is simple image distortion, a trick of low-resolution analog photography. But several image analysts have since reconstructed the original frame, compensating for angle and light. The result? A vertical object casting a measurable shadow inconsistent with the terrain's known topography. So, if it wasn't a glitch, what was it? Let's consider a possibility most refuse to voice. It was a structure, an artificial construct. One researcher, Italian physicist Dr. Mauro Biglino, has gone on record suggesting ancient alien contact in both terrestrial and lunar history. Though controversial, he and others argue that the moon's dark side contains remnants, possibly even surveillance devices left by a non-human intelligence. And the Black Tower. It fits. Notably, UFO researcher George Leonard, in his 1976 book, Somebody Else is on the Moon, argued that NASA had airbrushed out dozens of structures from original photos. His evidence was circumstantial shadows, shapes, blurred edges, but the Black Tower, had it been widely known, then would have been his smoking gun. But here's where things get darker. In 1994, the Department of Defense, in cooperation with NASA, launched the Clementine mission ostensibly to map the moon and scout for potential military use of space. Clementine took over 1.8 million photos. Less than 5% were ever released to the public. The area where the Black Tower had once appeared, images missing, redacted, or simply blurred. And in 2001, an anonymous whistleblower known only as Ken, a former employee at the Johnson Space Center, claimed that part of his job involved editing out anomalies from lunar photographs. One of his tasks, he said, was to erase vertical structures that didn't belong. Coincidence? Or is this part of a wider pattern, a quiet program to sanitize lunar imagery before public release? Why would towers exist on the moon? There's a theory whispered among fringe circles, hinted at in oblique declassified documents, that the moon isn't just a natural satellite, that it's an observation post, and not ours. In 2007, the Japanese Selene orbiter took ultra-high-definition video of Mare Crisium. And once again, eagle-eyed viewers spotted something strange in a frame-by-frame analysis, a vertical sliver black against the gray regolith, near the same coordinates as the original Luna 13 image. It was there for 2 frames, then gone. Was it a shadow, a digital artifact? Or was the black tower still there, appearing, flickering, cloaking? What if it's not made of stone? What if it moves? Structures don't vanish. Not unless someone wants them gone. NASA, for its part, denies any cover-up. But when asked in a 2004 interview whether there were unexplained artifacts found on the moon, astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the 6th man to walk its surface, paused and said, "There are things we were not told." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Because silence in stories like these echoes louder than any denial. The moon's far side remains largely unvisited. Luna 13's photos are still largely ignored, and the black tower, whether a camera glitch or a vanishing monument, stands in the background of our understanding, dark and silent. Waiting. Shadows that move. For most of its history, the moon was assumed to be a static world, still silent, lifeless. Its airless surface and low gravity make it the perfect place for a shadow to remain unchanged for hours. But what if some of them don't? Since as early as the 1950s, astronomers, both amateur and professional, have reported an eerie phenomenon known as transient lunar phenomena, TLP. Brief glows, color changes, or moving shadows on the moon's surface. Official science chalks them up to outgassing meteor strikes or optical illusions. But several of these events share 2 disturbing qualities. They occur in the same locations repeatedly, and the shadows change position, even when no light source changes. The most chilling reports come from one place, Aristarchus crater. Astronomer Walter Haas, founder of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers ALPO, reported in 1956 that Aristarchus would brighten briefly and then dim again under his telescope, a crater suddenly pulsing despite no change in sun angle. But it wasn't just him. NASA's own lunar observation logs from the 1960s noted at least 3 dozen TLP reports from this single location, often describing shadows moving against the crater rim, even during constant lighting conditions. Then came Apollo 11. On July 19, 1969, as the crew passed over the moon's far side, astronaut Michael Collins, still in lunar orbit aboard Columbia, reported seeing a bright area in Aristarchus that seemed to shimmer. The report was brief, never publicly followed up, but declassified transcripts from Apollo 11's mission logs contain a curious exchange. Collins, "It seems to be glowing like it's lit from inside." NASA Capcom, "We're not seeing anything on our end." Buzz Aldrin in background, "That's not a trick of light. A crater, glowing, flickering, with shadows shifting along its rim." What if they weren't shadows? A strange pattern emerged. TLP reports from Aristarchus often included a central dark spot that appeared, moved, and vanished. Some observers likened it to a figure, tall, thin, standing against the crater's inner wall. It looked like a man, wrote one observer in 1971, or a statue. But it moved. The implication is staggering, something moving on the moon, and it wasn't an isolated sighting. In 1988, an amateur astronomer in Madrid recorded a sequence over several hours where the shadow within Aristarchus moved counter to the sun's position. The footage, blurry and grainy, was dismissed by most scientists. But when examined in 2002 by image analyst Mark Carlotto, he made a subtle, chilling observation. "If this were on Earth, I'd say someone was walking across the crater floor." Even more disturbing was that the shadow paused, then shifted again, as if observing back. NASA, when asked about TLPs, usually responds with silence or reasserts standard explanations: volcanic gas releases, optical illusions, camera exposure artifacts. But no gas or illusion can cause a dark form to move against the light. In 2007, a series of images from the Japanese Selene mission showed new light anomalies over Aristarchus. Once again, they were dismissed but not explained. What could possibly cast a mobile shadow on the moon? With no atmosphere, no wind, and no moving parts, the moon is still. But these shadows are not. Now consider this. Aristarchus crater is the brightest spot on the moon, highly reflective and unusually radioactive. Spectral analysis shows higher than normal thorium levels, rare even for lunar geology. Something about it is different. And according to Apollo 17, astronaut Harrison Schmitt Aristarchus was off limits for manned landing sites due to concerns about surface instability. But some believe that was a cover, because if something lives or operates inside Aristarchus, NASA didn't want anyone getting too close. There's more. In 2014, amateur lunar researcher Richard Hoagland claimed that leaked data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter revealed subtle heat signatures emanating from the crater consistent with underground activity. He wasn't able to prove the leak's authenticity. But a year later, Chinese orbiter Chang'e 3 reported microwaves rising from beneath Aristarchus. The official explanation: thermal anomalies. Unusual heat, flickering light, a dark figure that moves counter to the sun. Are we looking at a geological coincidence, or is Aristarchus inhabited? One final clue comes from 1963, when NASA engineer Dr. Farouk Elbaz stated during a press conference, "There are several areas on the moon we simply can't explain. Aristarchus is the most mysterious." He never elaborated, and when asked about it, later said he had misspoken. But did he? Because for over 70 years, the shadows within Aristarchus have appeared, moved, and disappeared, always just out of reach, always on the edge of credibility. What if we've been watched from there all along? And what if the shadows that move are watching still? The buried metal. In 1999, NASA's Lunar Prospector probe quietly completed a mission that would raise more questions than it answered. Among its goals was to map the moon's gravitational field. What it found beneath the largest impact basin on the moon stunned the scientific community. Buried deep beneath the South Pole Aitken Basin, one of the oldest and largest known craters in the solar system, lies an enormous metallic anomaly. Roughly 300 kilometers wide and hundreds of meters deep, the mass was so dense that it visibly distorted the moon's gravity, affecting the path of spacecraft flying over it. Scientists referred to it as a mascon, short for mass concentration, but this one was different. Too large, too heavy, and too metallic. Imagine taking a pile of metal 5 times the size of the Big Island of Hawaii and burying it underground, said Peter B. James, planetary geologist at Baylor University. But the anomaly wasn't just heavy, it was ancient. When researchers used gravitational mapping and lunar seismic data, they realized this metal mass had been there for billions of years, possibly since the moon's formation. Yet no known natural process explains how such a dense metallic object could embed itself so deep without disrupting the surrounding crust. The official hypothesis that it was the remains of a giant asteroid rich in nickel and iron that slammed into the moon and became lodged beneath the surface. But even that explanation doesn't hold up under scrutiny, because if it were an impactor, scientists expected the metal to disperse, not remain in a single coherent mass. There should have been evidence of surface disruption of melted rock layers of ejecta fields. There were none. Instead, the object appears self-contained, structured, deliberately shaped, and that's where things get strange. According to a 2002 European Space Agency ESA internal briefing not publicly released, but later referenced in academic leaks, surface-penetrating radar sweeps revealed the anomaly had symmetry, reflective surfaces, and in the center, a core that returned radar echoes consistent with hollow chambers. A buried structure, a spacecraft, or something older and still functional. NASA's public response was subdued. They reiterated the iron asteroid theory, noting that metallic impacts could behave unusually in low-gravity environments. But they never revisited the basin with manned missions. Nor did any subsequent probes attempt to drill or scan it in higher resolution. Instead, the South Pole Aitken Basin became off-limits. A 2007 FOIA request filed by independent researcher Charles Wilkes revealed a curious omission. Internal planning documents for the Artemis mission series, which seeks to return humans to the moon, contained no proposed landings within 1,000 kilometers of the anomaly. When asked why NASA cited navigation hazards due to gravitational disturbances. But critics weren't convinced. Because other regions with similar mascons, though, smaller, have been visited without issue. So why avoid the biggest one? What if it's not a natural feature at all? In 2014, Chinese lunar orbiter Chang'e 4 began mapping deep subsurface mineral compositions across the far side of the moon. Using ground-penetrating radar, it too confirmed the anomaly, but added a twist. It wasn't just metallic, it was non-ferrous. That is not made of simple iron or nickel, but complex alloys, some not found in nature. This discovery was quietly included in a peer-reviewed paper, but the section describing the metallic composition was removed in the final version. When asked why the lead author declined to comment, theories exploded online. Some believe the object is a crashed alien vessel, ancient and inert, half buried in the moon's crust. Others suggest it's not a crash at all, but a constructed base hidden from view, placed there before humans ever looked skyward. Then there's the most radical hypothesis, that the moon itself is not entirely natural, that this mass is a keystone in a much larger artificial structure. A core, a generator, a signal emitter. Could the moon be a shell, and this its beating heart? There's one more detail easily missed, but chilling. In 2016, a seismic event was recorded by NASA's lunar monitoring equipment. A small moonquake located precisely at the South Pole Aitken Basin. It lasted 10 times longer than a normal tectonic event, and more disturbingly, it created resonance. A ringing, like metal being struck. The sound wave bounced through the anomaly in perfect, consistent waves, suggesting a uniform structure inside. Something engineered, and then silence. No follow-up, no confirmation, no public release of the raw seismic data. Just one footnote in a forgotten technical report. Why hide it? And what are they afraid we'll find beneath the dust? Because whatever lies under the surface of the South Pole Aitken Basin, it's not just heavy, it's watching, or waiting. And if it ever wakes up, we may realize we were never alone on the moon. We were only the last to arrive.